Are recording now. And we will be posting the event later. So if you would not like to appear, just remember to keep your camera off. So my name is Megan Armstrong Abrami, and I'm an associate professor of Hispanic linguistics at UMass Amherst. I study child language development. But first and foremost, I'm a mom. I'm also one of the co-owners of the Without a Village Instagram account, along with Amanda Richard Scott, which is an account focusing on the challenges of parenting in a culture where we are often, very often, village-less. So a few months ago, not long after Amanda and I had created that account, I had reached out to Dr. Narvaez, and it was my first semester back from leave after having my daughter. At a time where I was especially up in arms about the enormous mismatch between the way I wanted to be present for my daughter and the restrictions created by the society that we live in. In addition to these restrictions, I was thinking a lot about the way responsive parenting is actually discouraged, not just in society as a whole, but in our families, from the people who are closest to us, our relatives, our partners, et cetera, and what a tremendous hurdle that is for mothers to face on top of all the other challenges that we face in our lives. So I contacted Dr. Narvaez because in reading her work and familiarizing myself with her projects, I saw that she was a scholar who believes that we can change our culture. And I found that really exciting. So I'm grateful for her for being here today and being so extremely generous with her time. Before I introduce her to you, I just wanted to say that in your registration, you were able to include any questions you had for her. So we have a list of those questions. And so she'll be addressing some of those in the PowerPoint that she gives. And then we'll be looking for ones that maybe weren't in there and having her address those as well. Since we're a large group, only the host will be unmuted. But if you have a follow-up question, please do put that in the chat. And Mary Tarsha, a doctoral student of Dr. Narvaez's, will be moderating the chat. And I'm just going to take a quick second to plug her work as well, because it's also very exciting. So she focuses on how early life facilitates or not the biosocial construction of well-being and sociomorality, specifically the mechanisms of action by which the evolved developmental niche or evolved nest promotes human flourishing and peaceable children, families, and societies. So definitely keep Mary Tarsha on your radar, because she is an up-and-coming scholar in this area. And we're excited to have her with us. And so that's a great segue to introduce Darcia now. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Darcia Narvaez to you today. She is Professor Emerita in the Department of Psychology at the University of Notre Dame. Her research explores questions of species typical and species atypical development in terms of well-being, morality, and sustainable wisdom. And she looks at how early life experience, the evolved nest, influences moral functioning and well-being in both children and adults. She integrates evolutionary, anthropological, neurobiological, clinical, developmental, and education sciences in her work. So truly intersectional. She has asked many questions, but I think relevant to what we're talking about today. She's asked questions like, how does early experience shape human nature? How can educators and parents foster optimal development, well-being, and communal imagination? And her work highlights the fact that, and I took this from an abstract from one of her more recent papers, I thought it was really nice, that modern industrialized societies often do not provide humanity's evolved nest, thereby undermining optimal normal development in their citizens. And I think that statement really captures why many of us are here today. She is the author of numerous journal articles and books, including Neurobiology and the Development of Human Morality, Evolution, Culture, and Wisdom, which was the winner of the William James Book Award and the inaugural Expanded Reason Award. She's also the current president of the award-winning venerable nonprofit Kindred World. And then outreach project of Kindred World is the Evolved Nest Initiative. And it's a nonprofit mission to share her science research into developing appropriate baselines for lifelong human wellness by meeting the biological needs of infants. And don't worry, everything I've mentioned, we're going to be sending you out links later on so that you can have access to all of those. The Evolved Nest, I need to tell you, is an amazing resource. I find new things on it all the time. The book reviews I just discovered today are amazing. So we'll send you links for those. Definitely check them out. And also, she was recently named a fellow of AAAS, American Association for the Advancement of Science. And I think those of us in the co-sleeping, attachment parenting, bed sharing online communities are some of us are familiar with her blog on Psychology Today called Moral Landscapes. So that's probably within the online community, we see that a lot, but as you can see, her work reaches far beyond that. So we are so happy to have her here with us. And thank you again for being with us, Dr. Narvaez. And without further ado, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Megan, for organizing this, for inviting me, and for your kind introduction. I'm very happy to be with you today. I'm going to share a PowerPoint. As the questions came in, I kept adding more and more slides to it. So I hope you're okay with that. We'll share the PowerPoint with you later. We're recording this. So you can have a reviewing of it later on. So let me share my screen. Okay, so I entitled this, "What Do Babies Need?" because there's certainly a lot of misunderstanding about this. And I first want to say, though, that my overall view, as Megan has pointed out, is this is my research question, essentially, for all my work. What's gone wrong with humanity? And how do we change course? So I fit, I mean, that's obviously transdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary. And so I do a lot of integration across fields. And one of the aspects of this then is I examine bottom-up experiences, so early life experiences, how that shapes then the child's psychosocial neurobiology, how that affects who the adult is, their beingness, their morality, and then their cultural beliefs that they implement in the culture, and what they do to meet early, how they provide for early life experiences and basic needs. So I'm looking at all these levels, which means you have to look at our history as a species, our anthropology, all the different ways people meet early life experiences, and what childhoods look like and what children look like in these different kinds of contexts, and how the adults behave and the kind of morality they exhibit, and the cultural beliefs and practices, the stories they tell, and how that affects this cycle, right? And we have a film, 6-minute film you can watch, breakingthiscyclefilm.org. I think Mary will put it in the chat, the link, which talks about the different cycles that we're in, not the best cycle at the moment. All right, so let's start. What is a baby? A lot of people, most people don't know that babies resemble fetuses until 18 to 20 months of age. That means the bones haven't solidified, their different aspects of the body don't look like newborns of other animals. And so a lot of things are happening after birth. In fact, our human nature is shaped after birth. So if you don't provide for, if you raise a wolf child, that child is missing, that means they're raised by wolves, which some children have been found to be in the past. You find that they're missing a lot of the human characteristics, but they're not quite a wolf either, right? So they're missing that postnatal shaping of well-being and personality, their confidence, their sociality, their intelligences of all kinds are shaped during this time. So we really have a high plasticity or malleability or moldability at a neurobiological level, psychologically and socially in these first 5 years. And it just decreases over time throughout life, how plastic we are. So it's really important to pay attention to those first days, months, years, because there are sensitive and critical periods for development of various systems. So the stress response is setting itself up depending on how frequently and how exacerbated the child's stress is. They're going to have a different set of parameters than a child who's kept calm all the time. So their personalities are going to be different, and their ability to self-control and self-regulate is too. So babies evolve to expect nested care, evolve nest, which I'll mention later. We've got tons of podcasts, videos, and essays on this at evolvenest.org. And this nested care then meets all the basic needs the baby brings, which I'll mention later. And So the baby's expecting what our ancestors adapted to, what helped them survive, what helped them thrive, what helped them succeed across generations. So, and this is for 6 million years, the human genus has been around. So the testing of the nest has been going on for multiple generations, maybe 80 million years or 80 million generations. It's kind of crazy to think that there's an experiment that can say, oh, no, you don't need to do that. It's already been around for 6 million years or longer. So early life stress, then we know now more and more and more people are paying attention to this, how, because we have neurodevelopmental science now these days, and we can look into what happens when a baby, an infant is stressed. Now we know that early life stress is toxic. We didn't know this 100 years ago. And so people making decisions about how babies should be treated, they didn't really have much evidence for it. It was much more driven by ideology, by adult ideas of, just keep that baby out of my way. I can say more. Anyway, I can say tons more about everything, but I better move along. So what are the sources of biases against babies' needs? It's just apparent that we don't think much of babies, the way we treat them. There's various strands that have led to this outcome. The move to settled agriculture about 10,000 years ago started to diminish care for babies, replacing what we call the nested companionship care. They needed more children to work in the fields, but then they were less healthy. You can see in the archaeological and other evidence that the health went down, epidemics went up, and so on. We also have religious justifications that came about in the last couple of millennia. Ideas that babies are born with original sin. Look, they cry. Oh, they're so sinful. They want their needs met, right? And then there's the takeover of the common lands, especially in the last 1,000 years in Europe. And then that was brought to the Americas, which led to lots of disruptions in populations and homelessness and starvation and emigration. So we had a lot of people coming to the United States without their extended families. And we know that grandparents are the ones who evolved to raise kids, in particular to help moms. We wouldn't be here as a species without grandmothers. And so we lost the wise elders and the support systems when people came to the United States because of all the disruptions in Europe primarily. And then mothers without support would took up unhealthy practices. Nobody knew what to do, right? So they fed their young babies oatmeal, for example, and babies were dying. And so the Academy of Pediatrics was started with formula preparations that wouldn't kill babies. And over time, then the view was that, the scientists know better than moms, right? And they tried to scientificize mothering with all sorts of expert books in the last 100 years or so. And so that's been going on. At the same time, in the last few hundred years, in Europe, adult male thinking, male bachelor philosophers kind of decided what humans were like, and it's mostly about reasoning and thinking, and who cares about bodies, who cares about needs. Women and children, they're not as important as, our ivory tower thinkers who are bachelors primarily. And so this idea that we're morally more human because of how we think and reason has taken over. And so our schools focus on reading, and thinking that way. And diminish all this embodied intelligence that otherwise grows as part of humanity. And a lot of that is our heart-centeredness, our ability to integrate our emotions and our thinking and our social responsiveness to others into a way of being with others. And then we have Millennium, child mistreatment. Lloyd DeMause has documented this across European history. A lot of punishment and tying up kids outside like dogs. And so there's traumatized adults have been passing on their trauma. We know that happens. Parents do that. If they haven't resolved their trauma, they pass it to their children. And that's been going on for centuries. And then Western science comes in with experimentation, and it establishes its principles based on these species atypical patterns, right? So with the artificial food being fed to babies in the early 20th century, and then the separate sleeping that came about also from European things, then that was established as normal for babies, whereas both are abnormal and inappropriate most of the time. So what's happened in our, I'm going to hide this, hopefully, well, I can't hide it for me, the top. So anyway, our culture has trumped biology and evolution. In Ian Sutti's term, US has a taboo on tenderness. And he says that leads to all sorts of psychological problems. We know it also leads to physiological problems, all the health that we're at the bottom of every assessment of well-being for adults or for children that the world organizations do, UNICEF and others. US is usually at the bottom with the United Kingdom, because our cultures are very similar. And we can see then that we have this kind of misunderstanding going on. John Bowlby wrote this: although the overriding need of an infant and child for love and security is now well known, there are some who protest against it. They say, why should an infant make such demands? Why can't he be satisfied with less care and attention? How can we arrange things so that parents have an easier time? And you know that there are a lot of books that are still saying and having the same attitude, right? He goes on to say, in the meanwhile, we should be wise to respect the baby's needs and to realize that to deny them is often to generate in him powerful forces of libidinal, which means affectionate attachment, demand, and propensity to hatred, which can later cause great difficulties for both him and us. So that's where it gets then to the social level, the societal level that also interests me, because my area is moral development. And so we have a society in the US that's falling apart, in part, I believe, because of how we've undercared for our children. So let's see if we can go on here. So the evolved nest that we write about and study, Mary and I, is based in converging evidence across multiple sciences. So evolutionary, ethology, just a study of animals and animal development, ethnography, neuroscience, clinical and developmental sciences. The evolved nest is conserved for over 70 million years. It's been around because we're part of the social mammal line. Our genus has been in existence for 6 million years, and Homo sapiens sapiens for about 2 million. And because humans are born so immature and the development's happening mostly postnatally, as I mentioned, the evolved nest really acts like an external womb then. It meets the needs of the child immediately to keep the brain chemistry optimal, because when that baby gets distressed, the brain chemistry is destructive to the brain. Babies then require this nested companionship care to grow optimally. And I'm counting babies 0 to 3, 0 to 2.5 years to 3 years. Of course, we all need nestedness throughout our lives. So this is, but we're focused in on babies here because it's particularly important. Then the evolved nest then prioritizes babies' well-being for the long term and its effects on society. So any move away from evolved nest practices is a risk factor. And you've got to show me the effects of something that's not evolved nest practice. You have to show me that it has no ill effects across time, across the lifespan of that individual in multiple variables, right? So how many studies do you see that violate the evolved nest that actually show us there's no long-term risk to well-being?
And Darcia, just to clarify,
Yes.
what the evolved nest is that ecological system of care that optimizes child development, right? So you can go to the website that's in the link that I put in the chat for a more of a description of the nest. But what Darcia is saying here is that there is converging evidence from all of these disciplines, as well as from 70 million years, that shows this type of care optimizes child development. And the way that you care for the infant, and particularly in how you care for them at night when they're sleeping, is part of that.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, so I'm going to get to the evolved nest components in a moment, but there's kind of two ways of being, it seems, that we can map out here in terms of parenting, in terms of how adults view children. The nested companionship orientation, which is found all over the world, been our practice as a species forever, virtually, is guided by a sense of abundance. There's enough for everyone, right? We are here together. All needs are welcomed and everyone can get their needs met, and needs change. And so you're responsive to those changed needs. And you're really invited, as Mary was talking about this with her own mothering, you're invited to creative engagement. Needs then are varied by age, by individual, and there's an understanding that young children need more, and they need, to have the community, the mom, the dad, the grandparents to meet those needs. And understanding that child has an inner compass of growth and development. They are unfolding before us. So just stay out of the way, right? Provide what's needed and stay out of the way. And then this sense of security in an attached relationship. We are here together, right? So there's no worry about being detached, or, well, you try not to be, of course. And then you're flexibly and relationally attuned with a growth mindset that, everyone's on their path to growing into their humanity. And you're responding to needs as they arise. You're focused on the lifelong outcomes, generational benefits, intergenerational benefits. The other side is the one we see mostly around us now, is guided by a scarcity mindset that's kind of me against you. Is it parents or kids' needs, right? Shouldn't parents be in control? So I see that as the bias in a lot of these papers and research paradigms, where they're trying to show that it doesn't matter if you leave babies to cry, doesn't matter if you feed them formula instead of breast milk, and they're trying to show, oh, it's okay. And so it's, in effect, everyone's needs are being suppressed. The mom, the dad's, the baby's needs can't really be fully met because there's not enough, right? And so there's a limited satisfaction, and the parent is controlling the child's development. They're rather inflexible about that. They want to coerce the child to particular ideals that they have. They really have an insecure relationships, detached. Usually this means there's unresolved, unhealed aspects in the parent from their own childhood, which hopefully you repair before you have children. And then they operate from a fixed, anxious mindset, justifying rigidity, justifying the suppression of children's needs, minimizing those needs, focusing on immediate gratification to get something fixed. And attraction to research that shows you a quick fix, right? So it's very different orientations. Mary, you want to say something more?
Yeah, so what Darcia is explaining here are basically two different ways of engaging in family life, and different ways that we see our children's needs. And so we can all understand and really identify that the one on the right-hand side, this is kind of the dominant narrative that we hear a lot within our culture, but there is another way, that's the left-hand side. This is this nested companionship. And so it's really seeing and viewing needs of infants and children as an invitation to help them develop. Right? So rather than trying to control and guide them to a particular behavioral outcome, it's very reciprocal. And so needs are continually changing as they grow. And so it is this open-hearted way of relating to children.
Thank you. So we see in a lot of the literature that's pro sleep training, pro leaving babies alone, pro growing babies and forcing them into independence. You have to do that and teach them to be independent. Is they focus on experiments, but you really can't do proper experiments on human babies. It's unethical to randomly assign them to particular treatment. We're going to give you this mother who's going to breastfeed you for so long, and this other mother who's not. and you randomly select the mothers and children. You can't really do that. And anything really significant that you measure is really hard. Every baby is developing at their own rate. And every few minutes is a different baby because thousands of synapses, brain connections are growing every moment in that baby's brain. And so you cannot separate out experience from growth, except if you isolate the baby and then you look at what's happening. And we've done that with animal studies. So you can do animal studies on the kinds of things that we are important to us as human beings, because we're mammals too. And you can see that when the mammal baby's separated, bad things happen. Things get disrupted: breathing, heart rate, immune system, and there are long-term effects that you may not see immediately because the brain adapts, temporarily tries to adapt to the gaps in the brain, but over time, then they, like a foundation of a house, if you missed a pillar, maybe it won't matter for a while, but when that storm comes, oopsie, right? So it is possible to create poorly constructed experiments, and pretty much virtually all the ones I've seen that support sleep training are poorly constructed. They're not designed well. They have poor monitoring of what's happening, not blinded. So the people know what the experiment knows who's in which group. They're not controlled. They don't have a control group where they know what they're doing. And so they also use this intent to treat model or method, and used a lot in medicine, where you tell one group what to do and you don't tell this other group what to do, and then you don't measure what they really did, but you pick a variable and then you see if they're different. And this is would be rejected in psychology because you don't know how faithful the people were to the intervention you suggested, and you don't know, maybe the other people did other things. And besides, anyway, so virtually every study as well lacks a baseline for what's normal for the species. They don't pay attention to the fact that we're mammals. Mammals need to be held and touched virtually all the time. And they just assume that, yeah, it's like out of nothing. We don't know whether it's good to have breast milk or formula. We don't know whether it's good to breathe oxygen or not. It's crazy, right? It's the baselines are missing. So our species nest provides appropriate baselines, proven over millions of years, and a few experiments really can't compete with millions of years of testing. So the evolved nest has these 9 components that we study, and these are found all over the world, primarily, throughout our history. And when I speak to the world audiences, everyone except for Europeans and North Americans nod their heads and say, yeah, we know all that. And it's the North Americans and Europeans that say, what? So it's this Western culture that somehow has gotten twisted away from our normal species typical way of raising children. So you can see there's soothing perinatal experiences. These are going to affect the child for the long term. I'm not going to go through these. We could go hours and hours on these, and I'm not presenting that information. I'm just sort of giving you a snapshot of where we are and what to pay attention to. Breastfeeding, then positive touch, moving touch, really important. So when you sleep train or when you isolate the baby in their own bed, you are now violating that principle. Positive climate, so welcoming climate to that child, so they feel like they belong, they're wanted. Again, if you isolate them, if you sleep train them, you are violating this principle. Self-directed social play with multiple age playmates, allo mothers. So this is not all on mom. This is a village of care nest, and it's usually grandmother in our heritage, but also fathers and others. And then responsive relationships, really important to meet the needs of the child in the moment, especially a baby, keeping babies calm so the biochemistry is appropriate for growth, really important. So sleep training violates this principle as well. Nature connection, nature immersion in the wild nature, ideally, building a sense of attachment to the ecological landscape around you, and then 9 healing practices for things that go wrong or get out of balance. And we do that routinely, right? Our relationships go awry or we feel down. So we need routine healing practices to keep us balanced and in our open-minded, open-heartedness. So these are wellness-informed then practices, and it's this, all species have a nest. And as we've said, ours is over 70 million years old, and so on. I think I've said all that. So anything, Mary, or that you want to add?
I'm just putting some links in the chat that give for more information as you talk, Darcia. So if other people want to check that out.
Okay, and remember, you can save the chat. You click on those three dots down at the bottom where you can write a comment. You can say save chat and it'll have it for you at the end.
Could I just
Right.
ask something, Darcia?
Yes.
Because one of the questions related to your previous slide,
Yeah.
about experiments on babies. And one of the questions was, especially with books like Emily Oster's Crib Sheet, for example, where she's pulling these numerous studies and saying, it doesn't matter if you sleep train, it doesn't matter if you do this, it doesn't matter if you do that. So I'm just wondering if you could just go a little further in terms of the work that people do believe proves that something like crying it out is okay.
Well, I was going to go through a list of things that compares the two approaches, right? So parenting by experiment really is what Oster's promoting. And evolved nest companionship then is the kind of parenting that is our evolved heritage. So I'll have more to say, I think, too. Let's see if I answer the question. And you can bring it up again otherwise. So the evolved nest companionship, we've got 70 million years of experimentation, really. And it's the evidence is coming from multiple sciences. The scope is broad. It optimizes survival and thriving and well-being. The length of study of the evolved nest is millions of years. And the outcomes of concern are holistic effects on child well-being over the lifetime and across generations. The baseline is that you want to trust your nurturing instincts that have developed over these millions of years. And the bias is towards child and adult well-being in peaceful societies. The quality of studies are across disciplines with lots of different publications. On the other side, the parenting by experiment has been happening for less than 100 years. There are a handful of people that conduct a handful of studies, I may be exaggerating there, that are typically not replicated by other researchers. This is a major problem in medical research. It's also a problem in psychological research, the replication crisis, it's called. So most studies are not being replicated. So that means there's a problem with the design, there's a problem with the interpretation, there's a problem with how the statistics are run or what information was provided in the publication. And what we see is the scope is very narrow for these research studies. It's usually the researcher is even being funded by or tied to making money from. And a lot of the sleep training publications that I've seen have people who make money from a sleep clinic, or they're getting funding from who benefits from having sleep training. Crib companies, formula companies like that too, because it's hard to breastfeed when you do these things, right? And the American Academy of Pediatrics is funded by these folks. And so these trade organizations, like there's American Sleep Council or whatever it is, these are trade organizations that are promoting, making money from these things. So you have to be careful about who's funding the research. The length of study then in these cases are usually days or months, not millions of years. And they're looking at one or two outcomes, tangential, generally, short time period. They're not focused on child holistic well-being. They have no baseline, right? And the orientation is that you want to coerce and manipulate children into independence for their own good. There's just a basic assumption in this last 100 years about that, probably 150. in terms of discourse. And then the biases are not mentioned. They don't tell you explicitly, but you can see that they're biased towards adult control. They're biased towards minimizing the needs of babies. And there's, like I said, multiple flaws in design. And we've written about a few of these and complained to the Pediatrics Journal for very flawed publications and said it's very unethical. So that's happening. So how do you evaluate a research study? You've got to have a broad scope understanding of science. So that's where Evolved Nest helps you see the broad list of things, of sciences that are related to human outcomes. It's not just this one study that's going to tell you what to do, right? And then understand that experimental studies of a rapidly developing baby isn't going to give you a lot of information, isolating variables, and it's hard to apply to real life where every child is unique, dependent on relationships, dependent on your care 24/7 and all the interactions that ensue. And so it's really important to ask how the researchers are using the tools of science. Do they have skin in the game? Are they going to make money? Is their reputation dependent on this? Is their group or their funder going to be impacted? And do the conclusions fit with our species history, our species needs, our species development, our known clinical outcomes? And a lot of Oster's work just pays no attention to this, right? She pays no attention to the shoddiness of some of the research studies she cites, which is distressing because she's supposed to be a research economist, right? But she's not very good at paying attention to how well the study's been done. And so this is a big problem right now. And do the results of the study examine the long-term outcomes across years, and this means into adolescence and adulthood, in terms of multiple health outcomes? This is not what I see. I have not seen a study like that. And I think when we talk to parents, we need to say, do the results of this study that this person's citing, do they fit with your heart of heart instincts for what is best for your child? If you look at a parenting book, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so when we're talking about looking at the outcomes, so one of the limitations of empirical studies is that they have to select a limited number of outcomes. And some of those outcomes are really important, but as a parent, right, you want to emphasize and build the development of the whole person. So you're not interested in just a lack of depression in your child. You're not interested just in a lack of psychopathology. You're interested in their wellness across every domain. And so that is just one limitation of empirical research. And so when Darcia is talking about looking at the outcomes, it's important to look at, what exactly do you want for your child? It's not simply just one small outcome.
Yeah, thank you. So when you analyze a parenting book, you have to look at the credibility of the author. Do they have a deep understanding of child development? Emily Oster does not. What biases does the author have, and are they made explicit? No, she doesn't make those explicit. I'm just going to be honest about it. What baselines does the author adopt? Are they explicit? And do these fit with our species history, needs, development, and known clinical outcomes? Not in her material. And does the author provide enough specific details for the study references so you can actually draw your own conclusions if you go find those studies? She doesn't do that, at least in crib sheet. And is there converging evidence from a broad science perspective for the findings? Nope. And do the author's conclusions fit then again with our species history, needs, and clinical outcomes? No, they don't. So what is it that we want to establish as baselines? Our wellness informed pathway. What is that? That's where we meet basic needs. We foster thriving through meeting those needs. We develop a heart-mindedness, this full way of being a human being, central to virtually every society around the world that the recent European mindset has dropped, essentially. And then that also leads to an earth-centered living know-how, which if you've been paying attention, the planet is under duress in every sense of the word, and we're kind of failing at this. So the viewpoint then here is that you need to meet basic needs, and I think everyone's familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It goes in this direction. But turns out, though, there's another way to look at it. So they're in a circle, and that all of them need to be met. It's not a hierarchy. And actually, for babies, there is no hierarchy. They need all of this at the same time. Physiological needs, feeling safe, like they belong, that you're building their self-esteem, and they can self-actualize and grow into their unique, beautiful selves. So our basic needs are complex. There's lots of them. They're animal needs. And unfortunately, a lot of adults forget that we have more than animal needs, right? Nourishment, warmth, protection. Say that's enough, put the baby in their own room, their crib, and go off and, do your own thing. But no, we need affection pretty much 24/7, play, inclusion of social mammal needs of bonding and support and enjoyment. And then as we grow, many more needs. So what we want then in the wellness-informed pathways to meet basic needs that promote thriving and healing. They integrate body, mind, spirit, and heart. And then it promotes a know-how for compassionate and a regenerative life. And this is the cycle then of connected companionship, cooperative connected companionship. Companionship from conception, leading to good health in children and adults and communities that attend to the basic needs and keep the cycle going. So going against our species baseline is risky, and researchers should assume that evolved practices that are against the norm should be, sorry, I said it wrong. So any practice that goes against the evolved nest should be considered a risk. So trauma-inducing pathway is really what we're on. We don't meet basic needs. We promote ill-being. We underdevelop body, mind, heart, spirit, and we have a lack of know-how for a connected, regenerative life. And what happens then physiologically here is we undermine, we malform our stress response in that baby. You can see the brain size of an extremely neglected child on the right, a 3-year-old, that's a cross-sectional of the brain and the normal size of the brain. Now this is extreme there in the picture, but every time you undermine the needs of the child, you are potentially creating a gap in the brain. It's not going to grow if the cortisol levels are high from crying it out sleep training. That actually, when they get too high, will melt synapses and will melt those connections in the brain. And so you'll be, just not fully, you won't reach your full potential. So all these things get malformed, and that really is spoiling the child, in my view. You could say ruining, right, the neurobiology of the child, because they're sensitive periods. There's no way to repair them. Not always, but we don't know enough about what things can be repaired in adulthood. And so there's a lot of dangerous assumptions promoting baby independence. They're really all unscientific beliefs here. Forcing babies into independent sleeping is good for them, increases health and well-being, puts the baby on a road toward healthy physical outcomes, ensuring good sleep patterns. No, this is early toxic stress. Yes, sleeping is important, but there's other ways to do it, right? And there's that's where the challenges come in the society where there's very little support for parents. And making babies learn to settle themselves at night helps them establish self-regulatory skills. Not really. The child just shuts down their growth. It maybe helps them with emotional well-being. Now increases distrust of self and others and the world. Oh, it ensures children's ability to control themselves and establish self-reliance. Now promotes insecurity and dependence over the long term. And this is what we know from studies of co-sleeping, for example, are much better at promoting security and independence. And it's really the adults here that are promoting their own independence and detachment from the baby, unfortunately. So what we're in now is this cycle of destructive competitive detachment. We've got social poverty at every level, undercare of babies, dysregulated children, adults who have ill-being and limited social moral capacities, and it's a trauma-inducing culture. Adults are distracted, overwhelmed, neglectful, over-controlling, and they're just, money making is more important. And anyway, so we're in this cycle at the moment. So what I recommend is everyone get this book. It's really wonderful, Safe Infant Sleep by Jim McKenna. And here's a list of studies that where he mentions the short and long-term benefits of childhood co-sleeping rather than sleep training, right? And so people can, I think it would be great for discussion groups. We have a lot of blog posts on sleeping that I've done with experts in the area. And the mantras I think we need to say to others when they say, oh, you don't pick up the baby, you'll spoil it. To say, my baby is still a fetus until 21 months old. So my baby needs an external womb experience. Or when they say, I'll leave the baby to cry, stressing a baby undermines brain development. It's toxic. Or why are you paying attention to the baby? Babies know what they need, so listen and comply. Oh, why are you spoiling your child that way? I want to optimize my child's holistic well-being. And why are you not following what this book tells you to do and leave your baby to sleep train or whatever? The evolved nest was tested over millions of years. Show me the experiment that violates the evolved nest that shows no ill effects into adulthood. So that's it. I'm getting off my soapbox now so you guys can ask more questions.
Okay, thank you. So I wonder if anyone has, we have a list of questions also from things people asked in the registration. But you can also ask follow-up questions based on the presentation that we just saw. And so I think they're
Megan, I just sent you one that was sent to me. So
okay, I can read it. Sure. So this one says, excuse me, my husband and I didn't submit a question in advance, but if there's time not already covered, we'd love to hear any guidance or advice Darcia has on how to practically implement this approach with a 3-month-old who has trouble sleeping out of our arms. Curious her thoughts on safe sleep, co-sleeping, etc.
Well, as I mentioned briefly, in not too much detail, we evolved to be pretty much in arms or on bodies 24/7 as babies, right? So we're fetuses. So remember, your baby's like a fetus. And so it's vital that somehow you make sure they know you're right there. And that, how you do that as a family, it's all different and varies depending on what tools you have available. Ideally, you are doing safe bed sharing, and you're able then, if that baby, babies get scared different times and are growing and have growth spurts at different times. And sometimes they need to just sleep on your chest as a result, or they're fighting something off, some infection. So I think you just have to be responsive to the child. If you're privileged enough to have a lifestyle or an income level that you can actually stop and pay attention to the baby for the first 2 years, especially, and devote yourself to that, not alone in isolation with other people, but that baby, you'll benefit forever on that. The health of the baby will be better than a child who's left alone a lot. But I can't speak to specifics, really.
And also just to view those, your child is having a need, and so to respond to that rather than, trying to suppress that need. Your child is not, the infant is not trying to be selfish, or there's nothing, wrong or evil with that child by needing to be close to you and sleep on you. So that's, I think, important to keep note of.
My 13-month-old daughter is co-sleeping on my husband right now, if that makes anyone feel good. Any other follow-ups from Darcia's presentation, or we can also move into some of the questions that people had in the registration. So one issue I'll bring up, we all know that the AAP does not recommend bed sharing. If you look at online groups where you can go for support for co-sleeping, there are countless post in these groups about advice from pediatricians making specific recommendations to sleep train children. So going to the doctor and hearing that advice, you need to sleep train your child at this point. And this is often because doctors will tell you that at a certain age that children are supposed to sleep through the night. So this question asks, can you briefly describe what sleep training entails and why so many doctors push the practice? How much training do pediatricians receive in medical school with respect to sleep? And where do they get these ideas?
Well, first, nobody sleeps through the night. We all wake up periodically. We just don't, we forget it. We don't remember it. We're not aware. But babies do wake up more often, and they should, because they're learning to breathe. It's really hard to breathe. You know, they're used to having the placenta and the umbilical cord do bring the oxygen to them. They've got to switch the way the diaphragm works to breathe with lungs. And some of them forget to breathe. In Jim McKenna's book, he's got case studies in the back talking about parents who are bed sharing safely with their baby, and they suddenly wake up, they have some warning dream, and they look at their baby or feel the baby, and the baby's blue or cold because the baby stopped breathing. And so they're there and they shake the baby or, you know, rock the baby and the baby comes back to breathing. So I think it's really important to understand what a baby again is, a fetus. In the pediatricians, my colleague who's a child development specialist says they don't know anything. They don't know anything about child development. Now they read their journal. So we complained a number of years ago about a journal article with sleep training. It was co-authored by a sleep training clinic person making money from this. And the abstract declared, with no evidence in the study that was presented, that sleep training was safe for all children. I won't go into the details of the study, but that was extremely unethical. But the point is that doctors only read those abstracts. They don't know any better. They don't know how to read the research, probably. They don't have time. They're reading the abstracts. Oh, it's safe. And then the word gets around, it's safe, safe, safe. Now, it's really important to sleep, to get good sleep, right? And so I think the doctors are paying attention to that aspect of health. It's really important, but they have dismissed safe bed sharing, which is what everybody all over the world pretty much does. At least 90% of people around the world, according to Jim McKenna. And so there are ways to do that, but the doctors don't know that. Just like the obstetricians don't know what a natural birth looks like. They've never seen one. And so they assume whatever they've had practice and they were taught is normal. And the same thing's happening here. So the norms, baselines for what's good for a child are just assumed to be whatever I learned. We call this shifted baselines. It's happened all over the place in sciences where people think whatever the oceans, for example, were like when I was a kid, that's normal. But then you miss that they're getting worse and worse over time. And so that's the same thing that's happened in psychology and medicine is we forgot what thriving looks like. I didn't talk about that. You can look at our other material on what thriving looks like. We don't even know anymore. We're content to just, not die, I guess, not get too sick. So I'm not sure if I answered all the question. Let's see, looking at the questions. So they don't know very much about things. Why are they promoting this? Well, their trade group, again, remember, it's a self-interested group. The American Academy of Pediatrics gets money from crib companies and formula companies. And keeping babies separate from parents instead of a safe bed sharing promotes profits for both of those industries. So follow the money, but follow your instincts, really. Thank
you. I think that James McKenna's book should be in every pediatrician's office. So the next question I'm going to ask from the list is, one incredible obstacle for women who are breastfeeding, chest feeding people is the very short leaves that employers provide, especially in the US, which just clearly do not support attached parenting practices. And many women choose to sleep train, not because they want to, but because they don't have any other solutions to balance their career and their family. So what advice would you have for these women?
Well, it depends on the age of the child, right? So what I had written, I wrote notes on some of the questions. What I had written was, find someone who can live with you, who can sleep with the child, right, safely, or be there. So you don't have to do the sleep training if it's a young baby. Now, if it's a 3-year-old, that's a little different, right? They're able to, take into account what you're saying, and they can have a lot of other ways to support themselves. But a baby doesn't know what's going on. They go into the abyss of despair, and they're, falling into hell, really, for them, if you leave them alone to cry. And so there has to be some way to address not despairing your child, because now you've shifted their health trajectory to be less than optimal. So I recommend for women who can do it, for families who can do it, to just stop your career temporarily, or want less, work less, so that you do have time to sleep with that child, to safely, to care for the child in the 24/7 involved nest way. Now it's really impossible for some poor families or single parents, and so you have to somehow make your own community, your own village, to try to address these issues. It's just deplorable what we do to families today. Mary, do you want to add anything?
Yes, I think there is a comment from Donna Anderson, and I think it's great. We need to find a way to support the infant and the mom together as one. So
Yes.
Well said. I agree, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think we have to mobilize our communities to actually be for children and families, and that's going to take a movement. And get me on board. Every community needs to really move on this.
And I think another big point that we talk and write about is also the importance of flexibility in the work schedule for parents. And so this is also something that we promote, and if there's other ideas of how we can promote this across the board in our society, that's really important. That way parents have the flexibility to be able to care for the children and infants' needs in the moment, and as well as balancing work.
Someone asked about how the Industrial Revolution, or pointed out that the Industrial Revolution changed people's sleep schedules. And that's true, right? That to make us try to sleep 8 hours straight through, and that's not our normal species way of sleeping. We usually have 4-hour chunks, and you wake up in the middle. And in our non-industrialized communities, you walk around, you go have some tea or something. Now this is without lights on, though. This is no electricity, so you're not interfering the melatonin production that would happens at night, which is really important for health in various ways. So if you're going to try to mimic the pre-industrial way, then get up and go to the rocking chair, the child, and listen to music, or walk in the moonlight or something, but don't turn the light on. That's the thing that will stop melatonin production for 90 minutes, and you don't want that to happen.
There's a question in the chat. Why are pediatricians not doing this in support of and advocacy of their patients?
Well, you could ask that for a bunch of different advisory things, the advice they give. Not scientifically founded, right? This is not scientifically founded that babies should sleep alone, or that sleep training is appropriate. Not good science. But they are, they're subject to cultural pressures in their fields, like everybody is in their fields. So, and they don't have enough knowledge to counter it. So you have to find the people who are paying attention to the big science across fields, who are, they're explicit about what their assumptions are, what their baselines are. So that's what I tell people. My assumption is that we should follow what's been proven or tested by evolution for what, millions of years, at least 70 million years. And that's a better baseline than to not have any baseline and throw everything in the air and see what comes down. So yeah, pediatricians need more education, and they're overwhelmed with all sorts of things distracting them, just like everybody else.
And I would also say, try to find a pediatrician who has that open mindset to learn from you. So it's a relationship and a collaboration. And so, as parents and as mothers and fathers, there's so much wisdom there. And so they can also learn, and having that reciprocal relationship and communication is very important.
Someone asked about how to maintain consistently responsive caregiving when the infant will settle only with one of the caregivers, usually the mom, and not the other one. And so it matters how old this child is, but usually infants know who's responsive or not, so make sure everyone's learning to be responsive to the infant, and they'll be more attentive to the responsive people. But also you can use smell to help you. So wear mom's shirt, when you hold a baby or something, because it's smell. The baby knows mom's smell for 9 months and longer, right? Well, maybe not 9 months, but in the womb. But so anyway, that's just one suggestion.
It's in the questions generally, but I think in that vein, what can we do when not all caregivers support this way of thinking, when our, mothers and aunts or partners are saying, you're going to spoil this child, you need to teach them to be independent, you can't keep picking them up. What do you suggest for dealing with that?
Well, I suggest not talking to them. You just have to focus on the baby and not what people are saying, right? So your baby tells you what the baby needs. And so just be responsive to baby, and you have to shut them out for a while. And then if they could watch, when babies are well nurtured, and we see this around the world, they're so cooperative and independent. And when they're, 4 years old, they're so amazingly different than the children who have been, whose needs have been minimized. So they'll see that over time, that your child isn't all spoiled and dependent, unlike some kids who maybe they raised in the way they're talking about.
Yes, and just to add to that, I think it's important to, summarizing everything that Darcia has said, is that when we're looking at development, we're talking about different trajectories. And so the first few years of life, as she said over and over, and as the science reiterates over and over, are so critical for what type of trajectory you're putting your child on. And so those first few years are very intensive, but it's elevating your child's trajectory and optimizing it. So it can be hard work in the first years if there's not a lot of support around, but it's so worth it, right, in the long term. And as Darcia is saying, even at 3 and 4 years, you can really see the difference.
There's a suggestion here for the question. My response to when an infant is oriented to one caregiver and not another. Donna said, try skin to skin. Yep, that's absolutely the way to do it. So if it's the father, they don't feel as close to. Father can do skin to skin caring and holding for, however long, and that will bond the father to the child, but also the child to the father. So skin to skin is a wonderful just method. Everyone should have skin to skin all regularly. So here's another question on insights on the benefits of exclusively nursing versus bottle feeding. Yeah, breast milk changes through the day. So the morning milk has energizing ingredients, and evening milk has sleep-inducing ingredients. So it's really important to make sure if you're going to pump, to label your bottles, or else you're going to energize at nighttime a baby that's getting morning milk. Yeah, I probably would fall in the line of nursing skin to skin from the breast instead of bottle feeding nursing. But if you have to do that because of work, that's okay. But if you have an option, I think it's better to go with the breast, because the breast is always, it's a science laboratory. It's modifying what's needed for that child in the moment. If you pump, there's no saliva that's telling the breast what's needed, right? Unless you put saliva on the pump somehow of the baby. Yeah, so I would always advocate for breastfeeding instead of bottled milk, breast bottled milk feeding.
Can I add something to that as
Yes,
well?
yes, yes.
So we also do know there's been some scientific studies on just the mechanics are very different, bottle feeding versus breastfeeding. And so just examining one variable within the infant is the vagus nerve. So that's the vagus nerve that operates to calm and soothe the infant and all of us across the lifespan. That during breastfeeding, the mechanisms that the infant is doing by sucking and swallowing and the way that they're moving the jaw is stimulating the vagus nerve in this perfect way that calms them. And so they have this parasympathetic wash, which is so relaxing. Versus with the bottle feeding, it's more like gushing out. And so they're not moving those muscles in their face in the same way. And so that vagus nerve is not being stimulated in the same way. So yes, there are differences. And there's also some emerging evidence on epigenetic differences as well between breastfeeding and bottle feeding, because as Donna was saying, the skin to skin is so important. And so the way the skin to skin contact when you're breastfeeding, it is altering the way that certain genes are being turned on or off.
And there's some interdisciplinary research showing that when moms 300 years ago or so went to work in the factories, they breastfed less and the jaws changed. So the skulls from 300 or so years ago have better jaws, wider palates. And now we have narrower ones from the lack of lengthy breastfeeding, and that leads to sleep problems and various other problems as well. You need orthodontics, for example.
There was just, I think, a follow-up.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I think there was just a follow-up comment about from Mallory. My 2-year-old's pediatrician told me today, don't show kids you care too much or they'll purposely push your buttons. He truly thinks he's an expert on child development. And I think moms can help educate. But I also had to accept that they do not have the training, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, if you've let your child, if you've made them scream to get your attention when they're little, when they're a baby, then they will be a tantrumy kind of child, right? Because you've made them learn that they have to scream and push your buttons to get attention, right? But if you just meet their needs by watching their face and their gestures and they start to make a face, well, then change something, pat them or rock them. They need a lot of rocking for good digestion. And they expect it because we spent, 6 million years of our history walking around a lot. And now we're just sitting most of the time, right? That's weird for the baby's brain development. So they need lots of rocking and get a rocking chair. And it's going to help them with brain development and with digestion. Oh, there was another one here. The colicky baby. Yeah. So that someone asked, would that have been in the ancestral past? Nope. Would have been eaten by the predators, right? So our babies in our ancestral context, that means hunter-gatherers. We talk about this in a lot of different videos and podcasts and essays, so you can find out more. Didn't have time today. But colicky, meaning that they're crying regularly. There's no real crying in these societies because the baby's pretty much carried all the time, which grows the brain properly and all the self-regulation capacities of various kinds. And today the colicky, it's sort of an outcome. It's sort of like autism. There's a lot of causes for these outcomes, and that's true for colic too. So it could be that they're not being carried enough generally, which helps with breathing. Again, the breathing is so important. And so they cry because crying helps you breathe better. And then young babies, Jim McKenna has a theory that they can't stop crying once they start because they don't have the mechanism yet to stop. So in these ancestral contexts, if a baby starts to cry, they pick up the baby, right? Because they somehow know that if you let them keep going, they can't stop, right? But we sort of forgot that. We think, oh, it's normal for babies to cry. And then there can be interference in the microbiome so that a lot of pain is happening because they got sugar water in hospital. So that's a baby unfriendly hospital then if they give sugar water or formula for no medical reason. Or vaccines can do this too. And formula in general is indigestible for a baby. It's cow milk, cow mother's milk, not human milk. Mary.
Yeah, sorry, I was monitoring the chat. So.
Oh, I thought you were waving at me. Okay.
So I think we're coming around 1:15. If anyone has any other follow-up questions, feel free to put them in the chat, but I think we can start to wrap up. And I can also share, I think I can probably prepare something with some of Darcia's responses to some of the questions that we didn't get to, if that's okay. We will be making this recording. Oops, sorry. Do we have another question?
Mary, could you put the books in there's some books. Some people were asking about what could I read, or what resources attached at the heart.
And I can also, I was going to send out a post-event questionnaire just to see kind of what things people might be interested in the future. So I can list everything that you've seen in the chat today. And then, links to Darcia's work, her articles and books as well. And I will put
the PowerPoint.
I'm going to put also the email address you can use.
I'll send you the PowerPoint as a PDF.
Perfect. And so we can make all of these materials available to you. If anyone has any specific questions, they think of something else they want, please send an email to the email address in the chat. But otherwise, you will be getting access to where to go to find this talk, where to, we'll send the PowerPoint slides and then links for everything that was mentioned today. And if there's anything else on top of that that you'd like to see included, please just let me know.
Another book, here's the Sweet Sleep, which is La Leche League. Mary just put a link there. And there's another one, Attached at the Heart, which is also very helpful from Attachment Parenting International.
So thank you so much to everyone for joining us. I hope we can keep disseminating this really valuable information to get it to the ears and eyes that it needs to arrive to. And thank you so much, Darcia, for imparting your knowledge on us and your expertise, and Mary as well. It was a truly wonderful experience to be in this with all of you. So
thank you for having me, and thanks for putting up with all my soapbox passion.
No, I mean, we need it. We're soaking it in. Christy's asking, yes, well, so the recording will be posting on which site will it be on, Darcia?
It'll be at Evolve Nest.
Okay, so you will have, if you are registered for this event, then you'll be getting another email with where to look out for the link to the recording, and then you'll also get the PowerPoint slides. And if I don't have, oh, go ahead.
If you wait a few days, then we'll get the video up and you can send the link.
Okay, I'll do it that way. And yeah, so if you have had the Zoom link some other way and weren't registered, because I have all the registrations, all the email addresses within the registration. So if you don't think I have it that way, just let me know so that I can make sure to add you to a list so that you can get everything. But otherwise, hopefully we will be organizing more events like this. And we hope that you can join us again. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Megan.